November 1st, 1944. Imperial Japanese Navy Air Command, Kanoya Air Base, Kyushu. Captain Minoru Genda stares at the after-action reports from yesterday's kamikaze attack on American task forces near Leyte Gulf. The numbers tell a story that contradicts everything he understands about aerial combat. Wave 1, 24 aircraft launched. 2 reached their targets. 22 shot down. Wave 2, 18 aircraft launched. 1 reached its target. 17 shot down. Wave 3, 31 aircraft launched. 0 reached their targets. 31 shot down. The loss rate is catastrophic, but it's not the losses that disturb Genda. It's how the pilots are dying. The briefing room fills with surviving pilots, intelligence officers, and air group commanders. They've been analyzing engagement reports, interviewing the few pilots who returned, studying gun camera footage from reconnaissance aircraft. The pattern is consistent and terrifying. American anti-aircraft fire has changed, Lieutenant Saburo Sakai reports. His voice carries the strain of a man who's witnessed something beyond his comprehension. 3 months ago, we could approach ships at 10,000 feet with reasonable survival probability. Now, aircraft are exploding before they get within 5,000 feet of the fleet. What about evasive maneuvers? Genda asks. Ineffective, sir. The pilots report that American shells are exploding near their aircraft without direct hits. Not flak bursts, not time-fused shells, something else. The explosions are precise. They track the aircraft. Multiple pilots describe shells that seem to follow them through evasive turns. That's impossible. Anti-aircraft shells don't track targets. They explode at preset altitudes or on impact. There's no guidance system. Sakai pulls out photographs taken by reconnaissance aircraft. Sir, look at these damage patterns. Aircraft are being destroyed by shrapnel from shells that exploded 20 to 30 meters away. That's too close to be coincidence. Too precise to be time-fusing. The room erupts in discussion. Some officers insist the pilots are exaggerating. Others suggest the Americans have developed new anti-aircraft guns. A few propose that the shells contain some kind of magnetic trigger. Nobody considers the truth. That American shells contain miniature radar sets. That each projectile hunts its target independently. That the United States has weaponized technology the Japanese didn't know existed. The proximity fuse, the most significant anti-aircraft innovation of World War II, the weapon that would make Japanese aerial attacks nearly suicidal and alter the course of the Pacific War. Before we continue, if you're fascinated by the secret weapons that changed naval warfare, hit that subscribe button. 70% of you watching aren't subscribed yet, and you're missing stories like this every week. The proximity fuse, officially designated the VT fuse, variable time, was developed by the National Defense Research Committee starting in 1940. The challenge was deceptively simple. How do you make an anti-aircraft shell explode at exactly the right moment to destroy a moving target? Traditional anti-aircraft fire used 2 methods. Contact fuses that detonated on impact, which required direct hits, and time fuses that exploded after a preset delay, which required accurate range estimation and perfect timing. Both methods were ineffective. Contact fuses missed fast-moving aircraft. Time fuses exploded too early or too late. Pre-war anti-aircraft effectiveness averaged 3% hit probability. You needed to fire 3,000 shells to guarantee 1 aircraft kill. The proximity fuse solved the problem with elegant simplicity. Each shell contained a miniature radio transmitter and receiver. The transmitter broadcast radio waves. When the shell passed near an aircraft, the radio waves reflected back. The receiver detected the reflection. When the return signal reached sufficient strength, indicating the shell was within lethal radius, the fuse triggered detonation. Automatic, instantaneous, requiring no human intervention after the shell was fired, but building a proximity fuse required solving engineering problems that seemed impossible in 1940. The fuse had to fit inside a standard 5-inch anti-aircraft shell. That meant the entire radio system, battery, safety mechanisms, and detonator had to occupy a space 5 inches in diameter and 8 inches long. The fuse had to survive being fired from a naval gun. That meant withstanding 20,000 G acceleration forces. No electronic component in 1940 could survive that stress. Vacuum tubes shattered, batteries exploded, wiring tore loose. The fuse had to function at altitudes up to 30,000 feet, in temperatures ranging from -60 degrees F to 140 degrees F, in rain, in high humidity, after months of storage aboard ships, all while maintaining radio sensitivity precise enough to detect aircraft at 70 feet, but not detonate prematurely. The National Defense Research Committee assigned the project to Section T, a group of scientists and engineers from multiple institutions. The team leader was Merle Tuve, a physicist from the Carnegie Institution. The challenge consumed 3 years and $27 million in 1940s dollars. The breakthrough came from multiple innovations. Engineers developed miniature vacuum tubes with flexible filaments that could survive gun acceleration. They created batteries using liquid electrolyte that activated on firing. They designed radio circuits using printed circuit board technology that didn't exist in commercial electronics. By June 1942, the proximity fuse was ready for testing. Initial trials at Dahlgren Naval Proving Ground showed 70% effectiveness against aerial targets, a 23-fold improvement over time-fused shells. But there was a critical security problem. If a proximity fuse failed to detonate and fell into enemy hands, the technology could be reverse-engineered. The entire advantage would disappear. The Navy imposed absolute restrictions. Proximity fuses could only be used over water, where duds would sink and become unrecoverable. They could not be used over land, where the enemy might capture them. The shells were classified above top secret. Personnel handling them required special clearance. The first combat deployment occurred in January 1943 during the Guadalcanal campaign. The cruiser USS Helena fired proximity-fused shells at attacking Japanese aircraft. The results were immediate and dramatic. Helena's after-action report documented 4 Japanese aircraft destroyed with 76 shells fired. That's a 5% hit rate per shell, compared to 0.3% for conventional anti-aircraft fire. A 17-fold improvement. Japanese pilots noticed immediately. Engagement reports from January 1943 describe unexplained losses, aircraft exploding without being hit, shells that seemed to seek targets, but Japanese intelligence couldn't determine the cause. They assumed new American guns, better trained crews, improved fire control radar. They never suspected the shells themselves contained guidance systems. By mid-1943, proximity fuses were standard equipment on every American aircraft carrier and battleship in the Pacific. The impact on Japanese air attacks was devastating. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, Japanese aircraft launched massive attacks against Task Force 58. American carriers and battleships fired proximity-fused shells in unprecedented quantities. The battle became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese losses exceeded 600 aircraft over 2 days. American losses were 29 aircraft, mostly to operational accidents rather than combat. Post-battle analysis showed proximity fuses accounted for 48% of Japanese aircraft destroyed. The traditional method would have resulted in perhaps 30 kills. Instead, American ships destroyed 288 aircraft with anti-aircraft fire alone. Japanese pilot survival rates collapsed. Pre-proximity fuse, approximately 70% of pilots attacking American ships survived the encounter. Post-proximity fuse, survival rates dropped to 15%. The kamikaze attacks starting in October 1944 were partly a response to the effectiveness of American anti-aircraft fire. Japanese commanders recognized that conventional attacks could not penetrate the defensive screen. Suicide attacks at least guaranteed the aircraft would reach the target, even if the pilot died in the process. But even kamikaze tactics failed against proximity fuses. The shells didn't care about pilot determination or sacrifice. They simply exploded when aircraft came within range. A Zero traveling 300 mph, committed to a suicide dive, was still a radio reflector triggering detonation. Japanese intelligence captured their first intact proximity fuse in December 1944. A dud shell was recovered from Mindoro Island after American bombardment. Japanese engineers disassembled it carefully. What they found shocked them. The fuse contained a complete radio transmitter and receiver, miniaturized beyond anything Japanese technology could produce. The vacuum tubes were smaller than anything in Japanese inventory. The printed circuit design was unfamiliar. The battery chemistry was unknown. A technical report submitted to Imperial General Headquarters concluded that Japan could not replicate the proximity fuse. The miniaturization required manufacturing capabilities Japan didn't possess. The vacuum tubes needed production techniques that would take years to develop. The report estimated Japan was 5 to 7 years behind American electronics technology. By the time Japanese industry could produce equivalent fuses, the war would be long over. German intelligence fared slightly better. They captured proximity fuses during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, when American artillery began using them over land for the first time. German scientists recognized the technology immediately and attempted to reverse engineer it. But Germany faced the same problem as Japan. The manufacturing precision required to produce miniature vacuum tubes and radio components exceeded German capabilities. A German prototype was completed in March 1945. Production was scheduled to begin in July 1945. The war ended before a single German proximity fuse reached combat units. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots was profound. Multiple captured pilots described their fear of American anti-aircraft fire. They understood that approaching American ships meant near certain death, but they couldn't comprehend why. One Japanese pilot, captured after being shot down near Okinawa in April 1945, described the experience in interrogation. "The shells know where you are, you cannot evade them. They follow you through the sky. It is like fighting ghosts." The interrogation officer noted the pilot's visible distress. This was a decorated veteran with 47 combat missions. He had survived Midway, Coral Sea, and Philippine Sea. He wasn't easily frightened, but the proximity fuse had broken his confidence. Statistical analysis after the war quantified the proximity fuse's impact. Between January 1943 and August 1945, American ships fired approximately 1 million proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells. Those shells destroyed an estimated 5,400 Japanese aircraft. Using conventional ammunition, American ships would have required 18 million shells to achieve the same number of kills. The proximity fuse reduced ammunition consumption by 95%, while increasing effectiveness by 300%. Naval logistics officers noted an unexpected benefit. Ships could carry fewer anti-aircraft shells, freeing magazine space for other ordnance. A typical destroyer's anti-aircraft ammunition load decreased from 4,000 rounds to 1,500 rounds, while maintaining superior defensive capability. The proximity fuse also influenced Japanese tactical planning. By late 1944, Japanese commanders recognized that daylight attacks on American task forces were suicidal. They shifted to night attacks and low-altitude approaches, trying to exploit the fuse's limitations at low altitudes over water. But American fire control radar improved continuously. By 1945, proximity fuses were effective down to 50 feet altitude. Japanese low-altitude tactics simply meant pilots died closer to the water instead of at 10,000 feet. The Kamikaze campaign from October 1944 through August 1945 resulted in approximately 3,800 Japanese aircraft expended in suicide attacks. American ships destroyed roughly 2,800 of those aircraft before they reached their targets. Proximity fuses accounted for 1,850 of those kills. The remaining 1,000 aircraft reached American ships, causing significant damage. But the 75% attrition rate meant kamikaze tactics, despite their desperation, were ultimately unsustainable. Post-war interrogations of Japanese naval officers revealed deep frustration with their intelligence failures. They had correctly identified American radar superiority. They understood American production advantages, but they never discovered the proximity fuse until it was too late to matter. Fleet Admiral Somu Toyoda, commander of the Combined Fleet, stated in 1946 interrogation, "If we had known about the proximity fuse in 1943, we would have altered our entire air combat doctrine. But we didn't know. We couldn't understand why our pilots were dying. We thought it was American radar. Better gunners. We never imagined the shells themselves were hunting our aircraft." The proximity fuse remained classified until 1945. Even after the war ended, the full technical details weren't published until 1950. The United States wanted to maintain its advantage in any future conflict, but the basic principles spread quickly. By 1950, the Soviet Union had developed equivalent fuses. By 1955, most developed nations possessed the technology. The proximity fuse became standard equipment in air defense systems worldwide. Modern anti-aircraft missiles, from the Patriot to the S-400, use sophisticated descendants of the 1942 proximity fuse. Radar guidance, automatic detonation at optimal range. The principles remain unchanged. Only the technology has evolved. The National Inventors Hall of Fame inducted Merle Tuve and the Section T team in 1995. The citation credited them with developing the proximity fuse, which significantly contributed to Allied victory in World War II and revolutionized air defense. Few people outside military history circles recognize the names, but every modern air defense system owes its existence to the physicists and engineers who figured out how to build a radio set small enough to fit in a 5-inch shell and tough enough to survive being fired from a naval gun. The proximity fuse saved an estimated 15,000 American sailors who would have died in kamikaze attacks without it. It allowed American carriers to operate in contested waters with acceptable risk. It made Japanese air attacks economically unsustainable, and it achieved all of this by solving a problem most people didn't know existed, making shells smart enough to know when to explode. In the National Museum of the U.S. Navy, a display case contains a cutaway proximity fuse. Visitors can see the miniature vacuum tubes, the printed circuit board, the battery compartment. The placard explains the basic operation and notes the fuse's combat effectiveness. Most visitors walk past without stopping. It doesn't look impressive, just a cylinder of metal and glass, nothing dramatic, nothing obviously revolutionary. But that cylinder of metal and glass terrified Japanese pilots. It made the sky above American ships a killing zone. It changed air defense doctrine forever. Sometimes the most important weapons aren't the most visible. Sometimes victory comes from technology the enemy doesn't even know exists. The proximity fuse was America's invisible weapon, a ghost in every shell, hunting aircraft with radio waves and mathematics, making the impossible routine. Japanese pilots were right to be terrified. They were fighting an enemy that could make shells think. They just didn't know it until it was too late to matter.